Welcome to this broadcast. What I want to do is continue on the trauma healing journey and talk about a very important aspect of healing and working through it. And that has to do with the subject of shame. Welcome to the Healing and Freedom Journey. Mark DeJesus here. I am your brother from another mother, bringing you insights along the way. I'm all about mental, emotional, and relationship health. And if you are too, you've arrived at a great place. As I mentioned, what I'm going to get into is take a journey with you in understanding the importance of working through this area called shame when it involves our healing journey, our heart healing journey overall, but especially when it involves trauma. And as I teach on the trauma healing journey, I'm going to be moving more into a second phase. You can go back and check out, I've got about 10 or so videos that I've done on this subject, and I'll continue on this journey of the trauma healing journey. But what I want to get into in this phase is application, mindsets, tools, and practices that can help open up the healing journey. And I cannot talk about healing and working through trauma without first bringing out the need and your awareness of discerning shame's impact in your life and how to actually work through it. So today I want to bring that out, help you gain some discernment and what you're processing through, and also get to some perspectives and some steps that we can actually begin to work through it. So that's what I'm going to get into today's healing, the shame of trauma. Now, when I talk about the impact of shame, I call it a frontline enemy. And whenever you start working on your heart and start working on woundedness, start working on pain and things that have happened in your past, you're going to notice that shame acts as a frontline enemy. And what I mean by that is it wants to just hit you at the front right away, as soon as possible, even though other emotions can be very, very challenging. And we could talk about those, and we'll talk about those. Shame has a particularly toxic quality to it. It's intense, it's infectious, it's insidious. It doesn't just affect one area of our lives, it wants to contaminate everything. And what I want to bring out in this broadcast is understanding and confronting shame is absolutely critical because it disguises itself as a primary guard and protector. And I'll get a little bit more into that as I talk and as I share. But in reality, it keeps us stuck in traumatic pain. And so I want to point out shame as really as enemy number one. And I believe it is the number one enemy when it comes to all healing of our hearts in any area of our lives. It seeks to shape our thinking and our whole way of viewing what we've been through, where we are, through a very destructive lens. It drives us in fear to hide. It erodes our sense of connection. It erodes our relational world. It floods a sense of disconnection in our lives and will erode how we see ourselves and how we see God. And it takes what we've been through. And when you've been through a traumatic experience, it's very painful. When you've been under a series of traumatic events, it's incredibly painful. But what shame does is come along and make it even more painful. And its goal is to keep you from embracing a healing journey. That's why I consider this to be such an important subject, both in my church work and my pastoring and ministry experience and doing one-on-ones with people and teaching. I've found that when this work of shame is in operation, it becomes very, very challenging to even get to the wounds, to even begin working through it, because shame rears its ugly head and pitches a fit to keep people from experiencing the beautiful healing, compassion, and grace of God in their life. And I have a firm conviction in my heart that the remedy to shame is compassionate grace. And I talk about that in a lot of my teachings because compassion speaks of the love, patience, and kindness of God. And grace speaks of his empowering work, his work in our lives through the work of Jesus Christ that empowers us to heal, to grow, and to experience transformation. So compassion sets the environment. And we're talking about very vulnerable, very delicate, very painful areas of our lives. Compassion sets the stage. And grace fuels the empowerment that is needed to be able to take the steps of our journey and to not only heal, but to also grow. Both of them together are a part of the divine package of what God is doing in our lives, in healing us and setting us free. So when it comes to the subject of shame, oftentimes we have to recognize its difference from guilt. And I have a series on toxic guilt, as well as a series on shame. And I encourage you that if you get a lot out of this broadcast, if you get a lot out of what I'm sharing, to go and check those out and get yourself equipped so that you can begin to renew how you relate to God, how you relate to yourself, and how you relate to others. But in a quick summary, guilt's focus is on things that you think you did wrong or things you thought wrong, so forth. Whereas shame goes a bit deeper. It's more visceral. It's more than just what you did. It's about who you are. It cuts into your worth and your value, your sense of belonging. It takes what you experienced and what happened to you, and it wants to make it who you are so that you see yourself as unlovable, unworthy, to continue in a sense of disconnection. And it's important to understand that shame really wants to mess with your sense of identity and value. It tells you that you are what happened to you. Trauma seeks to become identity rather than an experience of something you went through that was very, very difficult, very, very challenging, that in many cases cut you to the core. Compassionate grace is going to want to invite you on a journey of healing and lead you into greater freedom, whereas shame wants to keep you trapped. And part of what it does is meshes it into your identity. So there's this sense of uncleanness. There's a sense of disconnection. There's a sense of fear. There's a sense of avoidance. There's a sense of, I can't go there. It's just too painful. Shame has a way of stacking on the pain of what you've been through. In fact, I'll say it bluntly, shame has a way of taking what you've been through and rubbing your face in it, to the point that even thinking about an event or thinking about the past cause a chain reaction of negative emotions to flood your body. Shame's going to communicate a message that says, I'm a contaminated person. It seeks to make us one with what we've been through. Therefore, I'm unlovable. I'm unworthy. I can't have vulnerable connection. And it'll really want to drive, and many of you have heard these thoughts where shame will tell you, I am broken beyond repair. You could think, I'm unfixable, whatever that means, right? It drives us to feel hopeless about our future, or hope for renewal, or hope for change. It's going to tell you that you're too messed up. You're really messed up. And if people knew, oh my goodness, they wouldn't even relate to you. They wouldn't connect to you. You're too broken to experience healing and transformation. In the decades of working with people, I've heard this a lot in the church. I've got too many issues. I'm just too messed up. The narrative of shame will fuel this sense of, what's the point? I got too many issues. I am just so messed up. Now, to help our discernment biblically, we have to understand that shame is an extension of condemnation. And I have a whole lot of teaching on the subject of condemnation and walking people through how to gain freedom, because the scriptures talk about being in Christ is a no condemnation zone. However, we do hear a lot of those thoughts coming our way, and trauma makes us very vulnerable, because condemnation speaks of a sense of disapproval over someone, and it follows through with punishment. I can get into that more in my videos I teach on condemnation, Romans 7 and 8, going into that transformative journey of getting free from it. But it's that connection of wrongness and then punishment. And many people carry a punishment-based relationship with God and a flaw and sin-focused relationship with God. When they interact with him, it's flaw and sin-based. That's what he's viewing you out of constantly. and therefore punishment connected to it. So shame becomes an extension of that. Certainly from a biblical standpoint, Satan himself is called the accuser of the brethren. And so shame aligns with this accusation, condemnation strategy to keep you in your pain, to keep you in cycles of that pain just remaining, and to imprison you and keep you from experiencing greater freedom. Certainly the first instance of this, when we see shame's manifestation, is in the garden with Adam and Eve. And I've talked on this in other videos and broadcasts. It's even in some of my book material, where as soon as the Genesis account takes place, we see Adam and Eve eat of the fruit, they run and they hide. And there's an aspect of shame that causes us to hide in a variety of ways. And I mean, relationally, there's a sense of, if you really know who I am and what I've done and what I've been through, you're going to reject me. You're going to abandon me. You're going to do the opposite of whatever love is. And so there's a chain reaction that takes place with Adam and Eve. One is they run, they get out of here. The other is that they hide. And then they, on top of that, they try to create their own covering to cover themselves, right? And they get some leaves to cover up their nakedness. And so we today follow the same patterns when shame hits us. We avoid, get me out of here. We disconnect, we unplug, we hide, we isolate. We don't feel safe around people. And trauma really, really magnifies this. And then we try to cover up by performing better or putting on a nice presentation, or maybe becoming very performance-oriented, or becoming perfectionistic. Many can even get to where they are very pressurized and obsessive-compulsive because they have this great need to feel loved, but they try to do everything just right in their thinking and their behavior before God. And so even the chain reaction goes further, because then Adam, he is riddled with shame, and he goes into the blame game. He blames God. He blames Eve. It's the woman you gave me. He's got both fingers pointed because shame has hit him before he even realizes what's going on. Even though in the midst of this, which I find to be a very moving piece of scripture, where God is walking in the cool of the day, as was the custom, and he says, Adam, where are you? And even in this massive consequence of what's going to take place, God pursues relationship. And so it's a picture that shows throughout the journey of Scripture, but it also shows up in your lives. We have this enemy of shame that's wanting to cloud over us, to cause us to run, to hide, to blame, to cover up ourselves, and to be afraid of intimacy, to be afraid of being seen in our brokenness and being seen in our sin, being seen in our flaws. So we do everything we can to avoid it. And I saw this early on in my heart healing work in the church, because even me just talking about brokenness, talking about woundedness, or talking about working through our issues, it caused a shame reaction in so many believers, where many were just like, I don't want to go there. I don't want to deal with that, because shame had conditioned them. And so that's why I believe this is such an important thing to recognize, to discern, and to understand, because when shame's in the picture, working through healing is very, very challenging. Some would say almost impossible. And so I want to walk through discerning it, because it's that important for you and for what you're navigating through and working through. So let me get to some of the ways that shame prevents trauma healing to help you. Hopefully some light bulbs will go off. Then I'm going to talk about the trauma shame spiral. I'm going to talk about what God says and talk about some ways that we can begin walking some new patterns. First thing I want to bring up is that shame distorts the whole picture. It has this way of skewing the lens. We lose the ability to see things focused. There's a blur to it. The coloration is changed, and we can't see things the way that we need to see them. We can't see them through a lens for what it is, so that then we can start embracing the healing journey. It becomes hard to even grasp healing. Now, compassionate grace sees you in your pain, meets you where you're at. It moves towards you. That's what God's compassion does. Moves towards you, inviting you into connection. Shame wants to push you away. And in that disconnection, this whole distortion comes into play. And now we can't see things the way that we need to see them. So in my interactions with people and helping them, it's like we've got to get the shame response out of the picture, because every time it comes in, it sweeps you away into a pathway that God is not in, that he is not saying, and that he is not doing. The second thing is that shame has a way of fueling anxiety. Like it just adds gasoline to that fire, and panic as well too, regarding the pain. And so it even triggers what I call shame attacks. I'll get into that in just a little bit. But that fear and shame work together. We feel unclean, we feel damaged, but also that we'll be rejected. Many people have flashbacks when it comes to trauma, and anything similar to that they see can create a panic or a shame attack. Sometimes you feel like the floor is opened up underneath you, and then you're just kind of falling into a free fall with no landing. And many of you have experienced this. You know exactly what I'm talking about. That fear will train us to fear intimacy. Like vulnerability is terrifying. And this can be applied to God too, of avoidance, of just not being able to connect to him. It's like he's not there. He didn't help me in it, and he's not here right now. Or we just fear the heavy hand of judgment, so we just avoid altogether. So we're afraid in relationships. It's very, very challenging to be vulnerable because we're afraid of, will people love me? Will they truly receive me as I am in connection, or will I be shoved away? And furthermore, it makes us afraid of ourselves. And some of you might go, scratch your head a little bit in hearing that. But fear and shame have a way of making you afraid of yourself, that if I step into this, I don't think I can handle it. If I step into this, I don't know. I think I'm going to go tilt. So we don't take steps because we're afraid of God. We're afraid of others. We're afraid of our own ability to make a step and to break through. And so that fear just keeps growing and growing. So we often isolate, we hide. We might hide and isolate literally in the sense of physically not being around people, but we can also do this while we're around people. And many of you know exactly what I'm talking about. You can be in a crowd of friends and loved ones and be there but not be there, right? Because shame will make you feel like, I don't fit in. I don't belong. These people don't get me. I'm not in the beloved. I'm not included in this. And so this is important to understand, because in number 3, shame partners with rejection. And I teach a lot about a rejection mindset. It's an important subject because it was very freeing for me to understand and for me to work through, because I carried a very deep rejection mindset. And shame and rejection develop this partnership. So shame partners with fear. It also partners with rejection. And rejection's mission is to keep a sense of disconnection. And I talk a lot about this in my material exposing the rejection mindset. You can check all that out. And there's lots and lots of blog posts and videos. I have a book. And in my Healing and Freedom community, there is a training course that goes through it and goes through a lot of aspects of the healing journey. But rejection and shame work together in the sense of disconnection, because shame whispers, if people really know you, they won't love you and they will reject you. So there's a cascade of things that happens. Hypervigilance kicks in. We're scanning for signs of rejection. You walk into a room and you're like, you're just looking, anticipating that people won't love you. And so we become fixated on that. We can become even compulsively preoccupied with it. So we can develop hyper-preventative protection. We act in ways that push people away, right? We dismiss people really quickly. We shut people down. We assume the worst of people. We don't give people the chance We can even apply what could be called preemptive rejection. And this is what that says, is I'm going to reject you before you have a chance to reject me. So I'll nitpick over something that I judge you over to just push you away, but it's a protective mechanism. And so this really blocks healing because it isolates my heart. It keeps me unopen to receiving love and support, and it's going to fuel my distorted interpretations and my perspectives. And it keeps me from approaching God or approaching people in fruitful ways because that disconnection's always there. Even though in the scriptures, we're reminded in Romans 8 where God speaks about nothing, and Paul in his writing, nothing could separate us from the love of God. And Paul said, I am convinced. And we are on a journey where that conviction needs to be built in our heart. But trauma really attacks that convincing, where we actually become more convinced of separation than we do that nothing can separate us. In the scriptures in Hebrews, it says, neither will I leave you, neither will I forsake you. Yet our emotions tell us otherwise, don't they? 1 John 4:18 reminds us that perfect love will cast out fear, but yet fear has a very, very loud voice. And when we're not rooted in love and we're not familiar with love's work, we can get really easily entangled in the fearful sense of rejection. And rejection's potent because at the bottom of the root system is this sense of abandonment. A fear of being rejected, of being alone, of being isolated, of being by ourselves, and dying alone. You know, some of our deepest fears if we were to follow the trail of it. So trauma magnifies all this because while all of us have these areas to work through, everything I'm sharing today is something the entire body of Christ needs to heal and work through. But however, trauma magnifies this. It throws a nuclear bomb on all these very vulnerable areas. And sadly, it doesn't work in distorting God's character. And when we look at the scriptures, you see it through a distorted lens. It takes our human shame and projects it onto God, and we believe that God sees us the way that we're seeing ourselves in our shame. I see myself in shame. I assume this is God's view as well, too. A punishment-based relationship increases, and it becomes this entanglement. You know, I was talking to one of my wife's relatives yesterday at a get-together that they were having, and he said about his walk in faith, and he said that it's like getting gum off of your shoes. You know, this performance-based world that we live in, right? It's just this entanglement, this punishment and performance that we live in. I got to perform and do right, and then if I don't, this is what's going to happen. And many of us are entangling our lives from it. We believe that if we fix ourselves, then God's going to love us. We fear disappointing God. And we feel in our trauma that he's angry, disappointed with us. So we just avoid him. Many times in our relationship with God, we can get lost in the why question. Shame has a way of getting us locked into a cycle of why. Why did this happen? Why me? Why this? What? And we try to find the meaning of it. And this, in my opinion, becomes a very unhelpful pathway. And for many believers, it can even become a dangerous trail because we're trying to enter into the heavens and see what was the meaning over what I went through. What's the why over this? And I don't find a lot of fruitfulness in taking that trail, but it's understandable. Job in his pain was going, why me? Many people throughout history, that's their pain rising up. So I'm not condemning it, but I am lovingly redirecting it because if we stay stuck in that why, it makes the healing journey more unproductive. Now, I mentioned this earlier, and I want to explain it a little bit more because shame acts as a counterfeit guardian of traumatic pain. It's an interesting thought. Because whenever trauma happens, there are survival mechanisms that kick in. There are protective mechanisms that kick in. It's understandable. But over time, we're going to need to recalibrate those. Otherwise, shame is going to communicate, no, this is protective. You're protecting yourself. But really what's happening over time is the walls of protection become walls of imprisonment. And so it's important to have healthy boundaries. It's important to have the structure of relationship boundaries in our life for sure. But when those things become so ironclad, there's no permeability of healthy people to enter in. And in healthy boundaries, there's a mechanism of, as we learn and grow in this, of people that are not allowed into those inner places, right? That's what a boundary does. But it also has a permeability where those who are loving and are safe have the ability to enter in after appropriate amount of time. But shame has a way of imprisoning us. And in that imprisonment, what it wants to do is it wants to cause you to turn on yourself. And this is at the heart of the healing journey that's going to need shifting, is that many, and it's at a, if I could use this word, an unconscious level, meaning we're not exactly aware that this is what's happening, but it's one of the biggest toxic mechanisms that takes place. And it takes learning and practice to untangle from it. Shame takes the traumatic pain and turns it inward against self. And it's usually because we don't have any sense of help. We don't have any sense of feeling rescued or a place we can go to. Many people who experience trauma don't even have someone to share it with, especially when it involves childhood trauma. The thought doesn't even cross their mind because they're already living in an unsafe environment. They have something happen to them. The thought does not cross their mind to even share it with somebody. And so when you don't have the ability to have an experience with someone that can mirror back to you compassion and grace, then all this pain gets shoved inward, and in that, you begin to turn on yourself. And when you turn on yourself, you become in a world of you against you. And now you're living in a, what some people call, I am my own worst enemy kind of world, even though you were not designed to be your own worst enemy. Shame will drive you into that posture. So then you're now hijacking any steps moving forward because you're turned on yourself. So you react to yourself critically. You react to yourself harshly. Self-hatred rises. You start to look at yourself with a animosity. And so now steps forward get hijacked. It's like we get sabotaged in making any progress. And you'll even project forward a negative outcome. So why even bother in that? And this now inflames what's called the inner critic. And when I talk about the inner critic, it's a harsh, relentless inner monologue that's going on. It's an inner voice. It sounds like it's your own voice, or it can sound like a parental figure's voice of constant self-rejection, self-hatred, self-criticism, and harsh self-judgment. And so when I work with people, I have to be very diligent to bring out how much the inner critic is dominating people's narrative. It's dominating the airwaves, the way they talk about where they're going through, what I should have done and this, and I'm just so stupid and I just can't get it together. And you know what? I just get everything wrong. They default to inner critic. When you're not loved properly and you don't have a model of love, you'll default to the inner critic. Trauma compounds this even more. So this is what I'm getting into now, is the deep trenches and the challenging aspect of healing, because trauma sufferers, they default to being hard on themselves. It's a way of survival. They're constantly kicking themselves. They're constantly being a drill sergeant. Some of that can help them survive. Some of that helps give a little bit of motivation to move forward. I'm not condemning the whole thing. However, there is a deep need for love and compassion and grace to come into the picture to drive this inner critic out, because the inner critic's not your friend, even though it presents itself as that. The inner critic's going to block you from receiving God's love. It's going to create a resistance to even be compassionate to yourself. This inner critic is going to keep you in this self-battle, and it's going to do a number of operations to keep this cycle going. It's going to dismiss what you've been through. It's going to minimize it. It wasn't that bad. Others had it worse. I should be over this by now. Or maybe when you're trying to express some pain that stems back to your parent relationship, immediately criticizes you that you're being dishonoring. And so you feel this need to kind of, balance it out or say something nice. And I understand that there are people who can call everything trauma. Certainly, there are those kinds of situations. But whenever you're looking at your pain and your traumatic history, the inner critic is going to want to dismiss it. It's nothing, no big deal. So let me give you a tip. If you think of the pain of trauma, think of the pain of what you've been through, and you instantly think of people who've had it worse, this is the operation of the inner critic, because it distracts you. Now you're on a tangent about people who've had it way worse, and it's been deflected off of just tending to the pain and letting it experience healing. It fuels unhelpful comparison, and it can even fuel a sense of denial, or just denying, not letting yourself go there and really allow yourself to grieve. The inner critic will never let you grieve. It doesn't want you to grieve. It won't even let you see that you need to grieve. It's going to go, what's the matter with you? You got this anxiety. Why can't you get over it? You've been so anxious. Look at you. You're so depressed. Get out of this depression. Why aren't you healed? Why aren't you over it? It doesn't want you to see that you actually have a need to grieve. Okay? And so then we can kind of remain in this avoidance of going there. As you go, other people have had it worse. But you need to start discerning this inner critic, because it's not God. It's not helpful. Because the inner critic of shame says your pain doesn't matter, while God says in the scriptures that he's close to the brokenhearted. And he says he has compassion on us as a father has compassion on his children. You can find both of those in the Psalms. But I had to, and many of us have had to come to a place where we need to recognize we've been listening to the inner critic. We've been allowing it to be a guardian. We've been serving what it says, placating to what it says, right? Like appeasing it. We're going to have to start drawing a line that says we're not going to serve this inner critic anymore. The interesting thing about shame and trauma is it can be felt physiologically. You can feel it all over your body, like a cloak that surrounds you. And this gets into what I often call shame attacks. These moments where you feel like you want to just shower it all off of you. You just want to get this whole feeling, because it's something that you can feel in your neurological pathways. A sense of relational disconnection is heightened. It's like a switch gets pulled. You want to escape. You want to get away from people. You want to get away from life. Most of all, you want to get away from yourself. And if you feel like you want to get away from yourself, this is the shame inner critic work that comes about because of trauma. And other areas as well too, but trauma really, really magnifies it. So then we get this sense of a block of even body awareness. There's an aspect of traumatized people where they're actually disconnected from their physiology. They don't have the ability to connect to just feeling the basic senses of their physiology. They're kind of disconnected from it, and they're just in survival mode. So therefore, we're not able to recognize healing. We're not able to recognize simple needs that we have. And then we're not able to appreciate progress we've made because we're so disconnected, and the inner critic saying, nothing's changing, nothing's going anywhere. And so there are many physical symptoms that come out of the woundedness of trauma, anxiousness, anger, tension, or the body just wearing down. And what we need gentleness, compassion, and kindness. And we look outside of us to find it. The problem is that so many of us don't have that. You don't have that in family. You don't have that in friends. You don't have that in your church body. So in that, we turn on ourselves. And instead of letting love reconnect us to be aware like we would if we were talking to a friend that we really loved dearly, that we cared about, instead, we turn on ourselves in a hostile and even many times an abusive manner. And so allowing compassionate grace lets us tend to ourselves in a renewed perspective versus just trying to get away. Love has a way of going, I don't have to leave, I'm going to stay here because here is where the beauty is. Here in this messiness is where my journey of healing is. God is here. He's Emmanuel, God with us. He's not far away. I want to embrace it in all the goofiness and all the weakness of it. But shame doesn't want to allow that. Now, I want to talk about something that's uncomfortable, but we need to recognize this because this will distract us. Shame will drive an obsession with blame. Because one of the things that takes place when a traumatic event happens is who's responsible. Now, the subject of responsibility is important. Shame, however, will distort it, and it will cause a fixation on blame that can become consuming. In reaction to the pain, we go, whose fault is this? And it's understandable. It's, we have these instinctive kind of reactions. Now, you see in the public forum, we live in a very shame-based public forum. You see it in news, you see it in politics all the time. A tragedy happens or takes place or something painful happens, and there's shame and blame. Looking who to point their fingers at. Strife fills the airways. Everyone's yelling at each other, barking back and forth. There's all this strife that's taking place. And scripturally, we know when there's this envying and strife, there's every evil thing the Bible talks about. So there's this tornado of stuff going on. Meanwhile, what's not happening is people healing. The work of healing actually gets neglected. Now, let me make this very, very clear. A blame focus, whose fault is it? It's this person's fault, they did something. Or even a sense of justice. Want justice. Very understandable. I'm not saying that's wrong. What I am saying is beware when that takes over, because we can become fixated on it so much, we actually neglect ourselves. We leave ourselves hanging because we're now chasing this. And I've seen this over and over and over again, where it didn't give room and space for the person to just heal. We get fixated on the one we blame. In the process, we get lost in fixation on them. And in that, we leave ourselves in the dust. And we actually don't get to the healing work. And we live in a world that's very shame-based in how people operate and how people interact. Social media certainly fuels it. And it can condition us into a shame-based way that we relate to God, ourselves, and other people. Blame can also get us locked in this thing on God where we get very angry with God. A while back, I did a whole video about being angry with God and how shame will really want to fuel that. And some people didn't understand it or didn't get it. It's okay. But there's an aspect of shame focused on blame. We're angry at God. We're angry at others. But here's the thing. In the midst of it, it also can fuel an anger towards self. When we become consumed with blame and punishment, we can also be blaming and punishing towards ourselves. So again, I want to make this clear. When it comes to trauma, we want justice and we want the wrongs to be righted. This is understandable. I'm not saying that's wrong. But we can become consumed with blame and justice, that we don't allow ourselves to actually do the daily work of healing in our lives. And furthermore, we can get so consumed with rage and toxic bitterness that it takes over. And now there's people that are living in our head, consuming our thinking, and we're preoccupied with it so much that we can become consumed with prosecution rather than recovery. Now, many of us, it goes back to our childhood where, children will internalize blame because it gives them a sense of meaning or control. You know what? It was my fault. And many of you grew up with that, where certain things and traumas, or even just instances in your home growing up, you internalize blame and you turned on yourself and you carry a blame-based mindset. Beware of this because it prevents you from healing in the long run if it sticks around too much. Another thing that's important to talk about is that shame's going to hinder your ability to process healing insights and empowered learning. Now, I don't want to look at trauma and go, well, that happened. What can we learn from it? I don't want to have that can be very, very dismissive and actually unsafe. But I do know that within everything that's happened to you, God is one who takes everything you've been through, everything you've gone through, everything you did, everything that's happened to you. And he wants to bring about a redemption to it and bring a power through it all. It's part of the picture of God works all things together for the good. And it's not just the good things that happened, the good things you did. It's even all the painful stuff and the mistakes you've made and everything. There's a full package of what God can take. He doesn't go, I love these good parts about you, but these parts, he takes everything and he's going to bring it about for a gracious, overcoming, but also redemptive journey. When shame's in the picture, though, any of that, any learning or any sense of like, okay, what can I learn from these experiences? How can I grow relationally? It's just not there. This is why it's so important to discern its work in our lives, because self-compassion, compassion from God, self-compassion, compassion towards others, this is critical for our healing, for learning, and for growth. But shame's going to block it. So even the thought of things, we get defensive, we get angry, we kick back, right? Because we feel ashamed, and shame tells us this is failure. You're a failure. You're unclean. You're contaminated. It's in our identity. So it causes us to back away from connection. And so, excuse me, even in Basil van der Kolk's work in The Body Keeps a Score, there's a quote here. One of the hardest things for traumatized people is to confront the shame about the way they behaved during a traumatic episode, whether it was warranted or not, right? Because very, very difficult. Many can become obsessive in it and spinning over it, compulsively, like trying to go back into it and trying to fix it, rather than letting grace and self-compassion bring about the helpful learning. And that takes practice. It often takes time after time of allowing that when the memories wash over and where the shame attacks are not hitting as hard and we can see it for what it is, see God's hand in healing us, and see the steps forward of how we can help others, and be able to live from a standpoint that's not so shame-based. Because when shame's in the picture, there is no learning. But in God's world, everything is learning. It's not about failure. It's all about learning. So here's some examples of this and how shame will do this. It makes any self-reflection feel like it's an attack. And this can then branch out even into everyday life, where somebody's just bringing some helpful feedback. It feels like a direct attack. It goes right to your core. You react defensively. You react in anger, right? It makes it difficult to even examine responses or things that we're working through, because it's like, you're bad, right? You look back at trauma and you'll see some of your survival responses, and shame brings it as a character flaw, as a really heightened, a very sin-viewed perspective. You may get an all or nothing kind of mindset. If there's something you did wrong, you're completely bad, and very, very black and white kind of perspective. So it's important that that we all see this. Is how can I begin in God's grace and love to learn? What am I learning about me? What am I learning about life? Because many of you that have gone through trauma, you're going to learn so much, you're going to help others. You're going to be able to explain what it's like to go through it. You're going to have great compassion on it. You're going to have an ability to point out things and articulate the journey so well because you gained so much of what you've been through and the heartache of it. I'm not a believer that God wanted you to go through that. Or yes, this was part of God's plan for you to have this trauma. But I believe that God is present to walk with us in the healing and overcoming journey. So let me briefly talk about the cycle that shame creates when it comes to trauma. You have the traumatic event that occurs. There's natural pain, disorientation, confusion, all kinds of factors that go in. I've talked about that in past broadcasts. Shame enters the narrative, and it really pushes a sense of a cloud over you, a cloak that you wear. This happened because of who I am kind of thoughts. The pain becomes internalized. This is the turning on yourself. I am the problem. This is all me. I'm unlovable. I'm worthless. And then healing is now blocked. And some of that is pushing people away, pushing God away. Some of it is the internal inner critic that resists when people show you love. And then we have these shame attacks. These are moments where memories, flashbacks, or even just anything similar triggers some of that old pain. And a couple things could happen. One, anxiety hits. A sense of abandonment hits. And the feeling of abandonment can be a very terrifying feeling. Another response is the fight response, which the anger can come up, right? And just like at the drop of a hat, all of a sudden anger is rushing out. Or you just have, anxiety that wells up. So this becomes neurologically embedded. It's activating brain pathways that kind of just it gets wired into our system. Now, this can be unwired, but it gets into our neurological pathways, so it becomes like an instinctive reaction. And in that, survival mechanisms take place. They get embedded, which at first are meant for protection, but over time they become self-limiting, even self-destructive. Okay? And so then we get into behaviors that confirm shame's message, where we go, see, these people don't love me. See, I am unlovable. See, I am worthless. And the cycle keeps itself going in it. Now, we want freedom from shame. I've never met anyone who, once they start to learn about shame, they don't go, I just want to stay in shame. They go, I want freedom. The problem, though, is that freedom is very unfamiliar. So stepping into freedom feels strange and almost too good to be true. And I'm going to give you some things that are more helpful for processing. And there's more to it, but just kind of some fundamental areas that I want to encourage you in. And the first place that I want to encourage you to start with is looking at, okay, I got to shift how I relate to myself. This is the self-compassion journey. That each time the memories come up, the emotions come up, the replays come up, is I'm learning to practice responding to myself in a compassionate and understanding way. And I do this by delaying judgment and embracing mercy. Just like I would a loving friend or relative that you love dearly, that you're connected to that love and you're hearing what they're going through and you're empathizing and connecting in that compassion. How would you respond? How would you react? Giving that to yourself. This leads to more compassionate interpretations because we default to judgment. We default to what's wrong with me. We default to trying to fix it in our head. We default to rumination. We default to all kinds of patterns instead of seeing things in a more gracious way. Like maybe looking back and going, I did the best I could at that time. That's a more compassionate perspective. It also includes compassion and grace for your younger self. And that includes 5 minutes ago, not just your little childhood years. Treating your past self with grace and compassion as you would a child. This is very, very important. In fact, this gets into some helpful heart healing work, recovery work, and even what's called reparenting. It's to see yourself from that lens of you as a child and having not a dismissive relationship, but a loving embrace. And many people find that trauma highlights they have a hostile relationship with their childhood self, so to speak, and just the imagery of those memories. But compassion is going to lead you home. We're going to change relationship with you in that way. Grace is going to point to empowerment. It's going to say, no. This thing that happened to you, this is not a liability. This does not make you unlovable. In fact, we're not going to jump to it right now, but down the road, this is going to be an asset to you. But we're not going to jump to that because many Christians jump to that really quick. Oh, this was terrible, but God meant it for his glory. Let's step into it. I think we rush that too much. Grace empowerment is really about the next step. Hey, it's okay to start working through this. It's okay to get some therapy. It's okay to do some work, to step forward, allow this to happen. Because grace also has a strengthening effect. That, hey, I can grow in this. I don't have to turn on myself. I can do some reading, do some learning. I can take some renewed steps here, and I can move from just surviving to thriving, but I'm going to have to learn new tools. I'm going to have to learn. This is really about learning new ways to respond to myself and what I'm feeling and what I'm going through. Of course, when shame's there, it's wanting to block all of this. It's wanting to put up a wall to all these areas. But we need to be reminded about God's heart in our shame, in our struggle. In Isaiah 54:4 reminds us, do not be afraid. You will not be put to shame. Do not fear disgrace. You will not be humiliated. Joel 2, never again will my people be shamed. It shows us God's perspective in how he deals with us and how he is looking at us. And yes, we may experience shame in this world, and we experience those humiliation moments, but God's like, as in my interactions with you, this is my heart towards you. In Romans 10, we're reminded anyone who believes in him will never be put to shame. But it is interesting how, because shame is such a strong emotion, we feel it and we can often associate it with like God is doing this. He's trying to shame us and shame us. And Peter echoes this. The one who trusts in him will never be put to shame. Now, when we look at the life of Jesus, we're reminded in Hebrews 12:2, very powerful passage, where Jesus scorned the shame of the cross. He despised the shame, some translations say, because going to the cross was a very humiliating experience. It was degrading. It was public. You're up there on this cross. Everyone would see you that was nearby. It was seen as like the lowest place of public humiliation. You have no clothes. You're just hanging there. And it was seen as a sense of being cursed, of being rejected, ultimately rejected. And this Bible verse is telling us Jesus looked at that and went, nah, I'm going to go through it. He looked down on that shame. And why? So that we wouldn't have to live with shame being our narrative, nor thinking that Christ is interacting with us in that shame narrative. He took it. He took that shame for us. So just as as I put on this slide, just as he took our sin, he took the shame of it as well too. So now with shame out of the picture, we can look at sin and heal and get set free. But so much of Christianity is still just saturated with shame, isn't it? So we don't know how to help people because we shame them, we shame ourselves, and then everyone's in hiding and no one's healing, and then we're all just self-protecting in our pain and in our struggle. That's why this is so important to work through. There's a no condemnation zone that we live in Christ Jesus. We're reminded in Romans 8:1. I bring to you today that the opposite of shame is loving connection. And I'd add to that, and grace empowerment. Compassionate grace is really where it's at. Most of all, we see in this picture, there's a clothing of his righteousness on us. So my robe gets exchanged, the robe of shame that I'm so tempted to wear in my life and my journey. Christ gives me a new robe, gives me a new garment. I didn't buy it. I didn't earn it. I didn't perform for it. It's offered to me, given to me. But I've got to practice receiving it. And a big part of practicing it is learning how to connect to the Father's heart for us. We see that picture in Luke's gospel, and the story of the prodigal son, the Father's response to his son in rebellion, in disconnection. It was not shame, it was loving embrace. And that is the Father's heart towards us, is lovingly receiving you based on what his son Jesus Christ did. It's not based on your performance, your past, or history. And the thing that I appreciate is this journey of gentle restoration. That just like Jesus, when he was dealing with Peter after the denial, and he sat with him by the fire, and he's just reminding him, get back in the game, Peter. If you love me, get back in the game. I got you. I got you in this. Of that gentleness and that restorative heart that he has towards you. And this is just my opinion, and I'm not trying to just paint this pretty little picture. But many of you that have had a traumatic history, you're going to be very encouraging and empowering and helpful for other people because you know what it's like. We have too many people that have a very sterile presentation, a very distant connection to trauma. We need more and more people that can look at others in the eye and understand what they've been through and be able to weep with those who weep and be able to give hope and give the comfort that you've received to those that are suffering in pain. So let me give you some practical steps because I think this is super important in this. And that's number one is see the shame and call it out. I want you to start awakening to the influence of shame. Catch it. Catch it talking to you. That's that shame. There it is again. Or even, hold on, I got a cough. Or even in those moments where you just kind of spiral, catching it. This is where the shame's talking. See how it's trying to interfere. Even start documenting it. This is what shame's been saying to me. Not documenting it so that you feed it. We're not going to feed shame. We're going to starve it. Some of you may need some help from a therapist or somebody who's experiencing this to help you see your shame patterns. But catch it. Oh, I noticed the shame trying to tell me this, and it's keeping me stuck. It's not letting me see this the way I need to see it. Instead of it calling you out, you call it out. Shame, I got you. I see what you're doing. And two is start challenging its narrative. Start no, I'm not listening to your narrative anymore. I'm not listening to your terrorism in my life, where you're constantly telling me I'm just unlovable because of my flaws. I'm made in God's image. I'm loved by him. He sees me and I'm loved. Where shame's going to hit you that, you all these things that you deserve in your sin and condemnation of recognizing and walking through it. And sure, you can accuse me all you want, but I've been bought by something. I've been given something new. This is something that needs to be practiced and experienced, because shame's going to tell you can't change. Shame's going to keep firing away. It's going to tell you you're alone in this and no one else struggles with this. You're very strange. You're very weird. This is where now we need empowerment, and love does that. It empowers us to go, no, enough of this toxicity. I'm not going to keep letting this voice dominate the airwaves. Now, this is where that's really going to change, is that you shift how you relate to yourself. We all have a decision in our journey. we're no longer going to be an enemy to ourselves. We're going to say yes to the Father's healing love, the love that he has towards us, and we're going to practice it towards ourselves. Self-compassion invites you into a journey of knowing how to minister to yourself. Because where people are not available or you feel like they've let you down and it's just you looking in the mirror, you make a shift to treat yourself like you would a beloved friend. How would Jesus treat you? Then practice that towards yourself. Now, I don't necessarily encourage like arguing back with the resistance of shame. Some people do that. They try to replace each shame thought with a biblical thought or God thought. And I could see room for that. I could see where that helps in some ways. But you can often get compulsively arguing with something that's just going to have another argument. My recommendation is keep welcoming, redirect yourself as the shame hits, redirect yourself gently back to the compassion that God has and learn what love is and what love looks like and start reacting towards yourself with that. And in order to do this, we're going to need to embrace new experiences because your physiology needs renewal. And it needs renewed experiences to provide new references. I'm safe, I'm loved, I can rebuild faith, hope, and love again. And so this is going to involve new relationship interactions, social opportunities, where you allow yourself to be a bit vulnerable one step at a time because people need to show that they can handle vulnerability. Gradual steps to allow yourself to interact. New practices of restoring a sense of love and peace. Maybe it's more stillness in your life, more room for quiet, times of meditation, or even just sitting down and just breathing. A little bit of nothingness, a little bit of room maybe to grieve, a little bit of room to weep through those emotions because some of your anxiety and anger and confusion and restlessness actually needs some space to grieve. Some new practices of caring for your body. Maybe simple things like waking up at a certain time, going to bed at a certain time, showering, having a little bit of structure in your schedule. Simple things like when somebody compliments you, instead of feeding the goofiness that we all have, I don't know, you thought I was going to, I was just appreciating, thank you. Thank you, that means a lot to me. Celebrating small wins and seeing the beauty in simple practices like reading or journaling or taking a walk, which is all three of those are very, very restorative and helpful for me. And having outlets like expressive ways you can express, like where you write something or you create music or you have art or some kind of creative expression or even just connecting to music. Many people can find such healing windows of moments where they're just listening to a song or maybe the melody. Sometimes I could be listening to something that has no music. And I'm struck in that moment with a sense of love, but also a sense of grieving. And I just stop what I'm doing and I just let the tears flow. There are times sitting here in the studio, I'm working on something and maybe some music's playing in my earbuds and it's just, it comes by surprise. And I just stop and just let the tears flow because something's needing to work through me. I don't know what it would look like for you, but we need practices that tell our nervous system, I'm loved, I'm safe, and I'm moving in new directions because I'm allowing the work of redemption to take place. And this is very important because the word redeem, it's a biblical word, but it speaks of something that was lost and there was exchange for it to be brought back. It speaks of the picture of what Christ did for our sins, the sacrifice that he took for us. It speaks to buy back, to take back. When it comes to understanding our painful history, redemption's an important word because it's the work of Christ to take back, to bring back, because there's actually power in what you've been through. Shame won't let you see there's power in what you've been through. And I want to let that sink in for just a moment because we get so lost in seeing the history through negative perspectives and seeing ourselves as like all this baggage we got. then we compare ourselves to others. No. What you've been through is an asset. So don't hide from what you've been through. Don't push away what you've been through. I know it's easier said than done because it's a process and it's a journey. But there's power that's there. And what I want to encourage you in your healing journey is have a radar for other people who are going through or who've been through what you've been through. Because there's people that need some encouragement out there. That, like you, they've been in places of isolation, desperation. Be aware of that. And to share with others what has helped you. Don't get preachy. Don't jump to solving people's problems. Don't be the Christian solvers. You know what you need to do? You need to read this book. You need to pray and do all these things. Just be a listener and share what's been helpful for you. Take an opportunity to be vulnerable. Share some things I've had to work through. Now, some people will take it, some people won't, but it's worth it. It's worth it. And there's going to be times where you're going to try in a relationship to be vulnerable. I've had this happen so many times. And I had to learn, that's shame kicking up. And with my OCD journey, kind of a combo, is I would share vulnerably and I would just get crickets, not a lot of response. And I had to learn to walk away because I would walk away feeling just terrible. Why did I share that? Inner critic would kick in, shame would kick. So stupid. I wish I could go back and not say that. And what I would do is replay it in my head, go back in time and try to fix it. It just makes it more tormenting. It makes it worse in the long run. I had to learn to actually celebrate, hey, you were vulnerable. So it didn't work out. That's all right. Is there something I can learn from this? Maybe next time I'll wait a little bit more before I share that, but I'm still open to sharing it. But celebrate the fact that you shared. Now, I like to give a little bit of a picture of what freedom from shame looks like, because I know people need some models or some things. I'm just going to give you some thoughts for you to think about and meditate on. This is not an arrival thing. I'm free from shame. This is a continual journey. But here's a couple pointers I'll bring out. Put them all up on the screen here. One is a renewed response to my struggles and my emotions. A renewed response. I start responding differently to what I'm going through that's difficult and my emotions that are difficult. Because sometimes we want to prevent emotions from happening. That's a myth. We can't prevent an emotion from showing up. What we can do is have a renewed response, how we react to it, and what we do with those emotions. Two is welcoming love when it shows up. I have love radar, and I want to keep growing in love radar. And when I see it, appreciate it. If someone's kind, I have a high radar for kindness. I have a high radar for someone genuinely thinking of me, writing me an email or saying something very, very thoughtful. It means a lot. Appreciating it, taking it in and welcoming it, not doing this thing that I would do I don't know, defaulting to the negative or yeah, and just focusing on what's wrong. Having a greater grace in how I handle others. Because the more that I'm free from shame, the more I see people through a compassionate lens, and it becomes more of a default setting when you see people going through things or seeing people struggle. A renewed interpretation of your journey. This is a big, big part because it's not what you've been through, it's how you interpret the meaning of it, right? And usually we have a very toxic interpreter that's shame-based. And to appreciate healthy vulnerability. I like when others are vulnerable in a healthy way, and they allow me to be vulnerable in a healthy way, and they respond to it in fruitful ways. The freedom to grow and learn from mistakes without self-attack, because when shame hits self-attacks, there's no learning. There's no seeing any benefit, anything. It's just hiding, get out of here, get away. And long-term, freedom from shame, greater joy. It's not like a light switch comes on and joy is just everywhere. It's just a little bit more. And I have people write to me saying, I got a little more joy in my life, a little more peace. That comes from knowing you're dearly loved. You're the beloved. I want to remind us of God's word. Isaiah 61 is such a healing passage of scripture. In verse 7, it says, instead of your shame, you'll receive a double portion. Instead of disgrace, you'll rejoice in your inheritance. And then he speaks of everlasting joy will be yours. But Isaiah 61 it's a healing journey to it. And so I want to remind you that that's God's heart. Now, what stuck out for you? What was helpful for you? I would appreciate it if you put in the comment section about which aspect of what I shared about today helped a light bulb or brought about a reminder to you and to your life and your journey. I'm going to continue to get into the tools and tactics of things that need to be worked through, things that need experience of healing in our lives and our journey. But what helped you? Because shame may be the frontline enemy in trauma, but it's not the final word. God's loving compassion, his mercy, and his grace is stronger than our shame. And he's inviting us into a healing journey. What he says is way more powerful than shame's lies, and his healing is more complete than shame's damage. And so I believe there's going to be a movement in many of your lives from shame to honor. You're going to have a sense of God holding you and his love towards you and his treasuring of you. And it's possible because of who Christ is. His grace is available at work in our mess. He doesn't hide from our mess. He doesn't avoid our mess. He's very confident within our mess. And that's comforting to me because we can spend a lot of time trying to fix our mess before we interact with God, right? Now, healing from trauma doesn't mean it never happened, but the journey is that what happened to us is not going to define us in a liability kind of way. And it's not going to limit our possibilities. Because in God's economy, even our deepest wounds can become places where God becomes real. Many of you in your trauma recovery, you're seeing this is where my walk with God gets real. Folks, my brothers and my sisters, you are not, what happened to you is not your identity, but it's some things you've been through. And you're on a journey of learning to see who you really are. And that's you're beloved. And you're precious in the eyes of God. And maybe during this talk and this time, I was able to help you and remind you of that. Because that's my heart and that's my goal in all these things. If this video was a blessing to your life and your journey, do me a favor, click that like and subscribe button. You can also go over to markdejesus.com, and if you'd like to support these videos, you can with a donation. No pressure, but if you feel it in your heart, you can. And there's more links to materials. There's topics. There's more videos on trauma. There's also a lot of mental health material I have, especially in the area of OCD. I have the OCD Healing Journey book and material that's available, as well as a specific book on our OCD. The Myth of the Perfect One. I'm continually developing material that's going to be for the benefit of your mental, emotional, and relationship health. And Lord willing, the creek don't rise, I'll be back with more insights for your healing and freedom journey. But in the meantime, I'm out.